Sometimes, love begins where we least expect. Between two people, two worlds, and two hearts that should have never met. This is the story of an unlikely love, born under the grey skies of London, where rain met sunlight, and something beautiful began. Before we start, if you enjoy emotional stories about love, loss, and second chances, please help us grow this channel that's just beginning. Hit the like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because your support means everything to us. Now, sit back and let's begin. An unlikely love. The train slid through a curtain of Mrs. Clara Almeida pressed her forehead against the cold window. England looked exactly like she imagined, grey, ancient, and oddly comforting. Fields rolled out like green velvet under a pale sky, dotted with sheep and old stone walls that seemed to remember everything. She was leaving behind a life she no longer recognized. A tiny apartment in Sao Paulo, the noise, the heartbreak, the version of herself that smiled even when she was breaking inside. Hey, in Cornwall, she would start over, paint again, breathe again, maybe even belong again. When she stepped off the train, rain greeted her, soft and relentless. The air smelled of salt and lavender. A taxi driver with an unreadable face helped her load the suitcase. "Where to, miss?" "Trevelyan Cottage," she said in her soft accent. He nodded. "Ah, the one by the cliffs. Quiet place. You will hear the sea before you see it." And he was right. The moment she opened the door of the little cottage, she heard it, the endless breathing of the ocean beyond fog. She lit the small fireplace, boiled water for tea, because that's what people did here, apparently, and stood by the window watching the rain. Back home, rain meant thunder and chaos. "Hey," it whispered. It didn't fall to frighten, it fell to stay. The next morning, sunlight tried to visit but got lost halfway through the clouds. Clara walked barefoot through the cottage, discovering its quiet personality. Creaky floors, a kettle that sighed like an old friend, and a single painting left behind by the previous owner. A seascape in muted blues, signed E.W. By noon, she walked into the village. The streets were cobbled and smelled of freshly baked bread. People greeted her politely, reserved smiles, soft nods. In a small shop, the woman behind the counter asked, "Holiday?" "No," Clara smiled. "New life." That evening, she sat by the cliffs with her sketchbook. The wind was sharp, but she painted anyway. The sea, the rocks, the endless gray horizon. When she looked up, she noticed a man standing a few meters away, his hands in his coat pockets, watching the same ocean. He didn't speak, just nodded slightly when their eyes met, the kind of nod that said, "Yes, I see you, too." Later, she learned his name was Edward Whitmore, and that he lived just 3 doors down. Edward Whitmore was the kind of man who moved quietly, like he didn't want to disturb the air. A retired literature professor, widowed for 6 years, known in the village for his impeccable manners and unreadable silences. Clara met him properly 2 days later, when her groceries decided to rebel. The paper bag ripped, and apples rolled dramatically across the path. He appeared out of nowhere, kneeling to catch one before it reached the gutter. "Rebellion," he said dryly, holding the apple up. "Typical British weather, even fruit misbehaves." She laughed. "Obrigada." He blinked. "I'm sorry." "It means thank you," she said. "Portuguese." He smiled faintly. "I'll try to remember that." He carried her bag to her gate, hesitated a moment, and added, "I'm Medwood. I live next door to the overly enthusiastic cat." She laughed again. "Clara, I paint. Or try to." "Well, then," he said, adjusting his scarf, "if you ever need more paper bags, I have a lifetime supply." And just like that, something gentle began. Not a spark, but a quiet warmth, like the first light after rain. The next day, there was a knock on her door. Edward stood there holding a teapot and a tentative smile. "I thought it was time we upgraded from paper bags to proper introductions," he said. Inside, the cottage smelled of paint and coffee. She apologized for the mess. He said it looked like life. They talked about books, about art, about the weather, which, to her surprise, he had opinions on. "It rains differently here," she said. "It's emotional." He chuckled. "You just described the entire British people." She taught him how to say bon dia, sodade, and coracal. He tried, stumbling through the syllables like a boy learning to dance. When he said coracal, hot, she looked up from her cup. "You sound like you mean it," she said softly. He blinked, caught off guard. "Maybe I do." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was full of something unnamed but already growing roots. A week later, the storm came. Wind roared through the cliffs, and the sea turned wild. Clara tried to secure the shutters, but one window pane cracked under the pressure, sending her easel toppling over. When she lifted the canvas, her half-finished painting had split down the middle. It looked like a wound. That night, there was another knock. Edward, soaked from the rain, stood with a toolbox. "I saw the light go out," he said, and figured that meant trouble. He repaired the window while she held the lamp. The storm outside grew louder, but the silence inside grew safer. When he was done, he turned to see her staring at the broken painting. "I can fix the frame," he said gently, "but maybe not the rest." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's supposed to stay broken." He looked at her for a long moment. Maybe some things are beautiful because they survived. The wind softened, the rain slowed, and between them, something wordless began to mend. It was raining again, the kind of fine, endless drizzle that England wears like perfume. Clara found herself wandering into the old town library, seeking warmth. The smell of paper and tea filled the air. Dust floated like glitter through the quiet light. Edward was there, of course, sitting in his usual corner, reading Virginia Woolf. His glasses were slightly fogged, his scarf the same deep gray as the weather. He looked up when she walked in. "You found the one place where time doesn't move," he said softly. "Then maybe I'll stay here forever," she replied. They sat together at the same table, exchanging few words. She watched him trace sentences with his finger, gentle, deliberate, like someone who still believes in the weight of language. At one point, she smiled without meaning to. He noticed. "What?" "You read like you're praying." He closed the book, smiling faintly. "And you look at the world like it's forgiven you." For a heartbeat, the library forgot to breathe. Days passed. The bond between them grew like a secret garden, quietly, beautifully, carefully. But that week, the sea grew restless again. The waves slammed against the cliffs. The wind howled like something ancient. Edward invited her over for dinner, as neighbors, he said, which fooled neither of them. His house smelled of cinnamon and rain. He served soup, awkwardly, as if every ladle was a test. They talked for hours about Brazil and London, about sodade and solitude. She told him about her mother's laughter, about painting under the sun until her hands turned the color of clay. He told her about his late wife, about silence that used to comfort but now only echoed. Outside, the storm rose. Thunder shook the windows. When a loud crack startled her, she flinched and he reached for her hand. Neither moved after that. The storm passed, but they didn't let go. The next morning, Edward found himself at his desk, unable to read. Words refused to behave. Instead, he opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside, letters he had written to his late wife but never mailed. He reread one. "You would have liked Clara," he thought. "She laughed the way you used to when life was simple." He didn't write that down. Instead, he started a new letter. This one had no name. "To whoever finds me between what was and what will be, thank you for knocking softly." He folded the letter and hid it inside his notebook. That evening, Clara came by with a painting. The sea after the storm, full of light. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" "For reminding me that calm can be beautiful too." He looked at her, realizing something had already changed. "You've brought color to a gray country," he said. And she, smiling shyly, replied, "And you brought silence to my chaos." By early spring, the village was in bloom. Daffodils, tulips, and that stubborn English sunshine that appears just long enough to make people believe in happiness. Clara painted in Edward's garden while he read under the oak tree. She would hum softly, and he'd pretend not to listen, though he always smiled at the same note. "Do you ever get lonely here?" she asked, cleaning her brush. He looked up. "Not anymore." She paused, sunlight brushing her cheek. I miss the noise sometimes. Brazil is louder. We talk with our hands, our hearts, our everything. He chuckled. And the British talk with tea and the weather. That's why I keep painting, she said, so we can meet halfway. Later, he brewed her tea badly, too strong, too cold. She pretended to love it anyway. You're impossible, she teased. He grinned. You're the first person who's ever said that like it's a compliment. One rare morning, the sun came without apology. The sea glittered, the cliffs turned gold, and the air smelled of salt and promise. Clara and Edward walked to the harbor. Children chased gulls. Old men read newspapers in silence. She slipped her arm through his, naturally, without hesitation. Do you ever think you could love again? She asked quietly. He hesitated. I don't think love ever really ends. It just changes rooms. And what room are we in? She teased gently. He smiled, looking out at the waves, one with open windows. That night, back in her cottage, she painted again, this time not the sea, not the cliffs, but him, his quiet eyes, his patience, his light. Outside, the orange evening faded into soft rain, and inside, under her hands, love began to take shape, slowly, imperfectly, but truthfully. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of storms. Clara climbed the narrow stairs to the attic of her cottage, where she stored canvases that never made it to the light. The ceiling slanted low, dust swirled in the golden beam of her lantern. She was searching for new brushes when she found an old chest tucked behind a beam. Inside, there were brittle pages wrapped in cloth, letters, yellowed and delicate, written in English cursive. The first one began, Dearest Elizabeth, I'll return to the cliff soon. The sea keeps whispering your name through every storm. Her heart tightened. E.W., the same initials from the seascape painting left in the cottage. Edward Whitmore. Her fingers trembled as she read another. This house remembers our laughter. It holds what I cannot say aloud. If you ever come back, light the orange lamp. Clara sat on the wooden floor, the paper fluttering in her hands. He had loved someone here. Maybe he had loved her here. That evening, she didn't go to see him. She painted instead, furious strokes of gray and amber, the sea devouring itself, beautiful and cruel. 2 days passed before she saw Edward again. He appeared at her door, holding a book she had lent him, Gabriela Cravo y Canela, the Portuguese edition. You disappeared, he said gently. I was painting, she lied. He noticed the exhaustion around her eyes. You've been crying. Maybe, she said. Do you still love her? He blinked, startled. Who? The woman in the attic. He went still. You found the letters. I didn't mean to. They were hidden there with your initials. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing something heavy. She was my wife, he said. Elizabeth. We spent one summer here, long before the world fell apart. This cottage was ours before it was yours. Silence folded between them. I thought you should know, she said softly, because I don't want to be a ghost standing next to yours. He stepped closer, voice low. You aren't a ghost. Clara, you're the reason I finally opened the door again. But she couldn't look at him. Not yet. The past was too alive, and her heart too human. That night, she walked alone to the cliffs. The sea roared below, wild and endless, and she whispered into the wind, don't let me fall in love with someone still holding another world. Weeks passed. The sky refused to make up its mind. Rain, sun, fog, then rain again. Clara painted less and stared more. The cottage felt smaller, like the walls were listening. One morning, her phone rang. The screen flashed May. She hadn't heard that voice in months. Warm, fast, full of life. Clara, you and more. Are you happy there? She hesitated. I'm learning. Her mother laughed softly. That means no. They spoke for nearly an hour about home, the mango tree, her brother's wedding. Then her mother said, you don't sound like yourself. Clara looked out the window at the gray horizon. Maybe I'm becoming someone else. Then make sure she smiles, her mother replied. Because saudade is a kind of hunger. Fill her. Don't starve your joy. After the call, Clara walked to the market just to hear other voices. Edward saw her from across the square but didn't approach. Something in her expression said she needed to be alone. That night, she cooked moqueca, filling the house with the scent of garlic and coconut. She opened her window wide, letting the smell wander into the English air, a quiet rebellion, a piece of home refusing to vanish. It rained again that Thursday, soft and endless. Clara returned to the library, trying to find quiet. Edward was there, at his usual table, surrounded by papers and tea. They exchanged a polite nod, nothing more. He slid a book toward her as she passed. The book she never read, his own. She hadn't known he had written one. Inside the cover, he had written in neat handwriting, "For the woman who reminded me that even rain can have sunlight in it." Her breath caught. She turned to the first chapter. It was about love, loss, and the impossible art of beginning again. He wrote of a woman who painted the sea until she could forgive it. That evening, she knocked on his door. He opened it before she spoke, as if he'd been waiting. "I read it," she said softly. "All of it. And it hurt," she whispered. "But it healed too." He smiled sadly. "That's what love does." Inside, the kettle whistled softly, like applause for something both fragile and brave. Summer arrived late that year. Clara and Edward met often, in the garden, by the sea, at the library. They didn't call it love, not yet. It was something quieter, an understanding that lived in gestures, not promises. But one afternoon, everything almost broke again. They were walking near the old bridge when she stopped, eyes clouded. "I can't do this halfway, Edward. I don't know how to love quietly." He looked at her, drenched in rain that had started without warning. "And I don't know how to love loudly." She laughed through tears. "Then what do we do?" "Maybe," he said, stepping closer, "we meet in the middle, where rain meets sunlight." She stared at him, unsure whether to cry or kiss him. And then she did both. The rain soaked them. The bridge trembled beneath their feet. And for the first time, their worlds stopped colliding and simply merged. It wasn't perfect. It was real. And for both of them, that was enough. It had been a week since the bridge. They hadn't spoken much, not because something was wrong, but because everything suddenly mattered too much. Clara decided to finish the painting she had once abandoned, the one she started on her first day in Cornwall. She placed it on the easel near the window. The sea, the cliffs, the orange-tinged sky. But this time, she added something new, a figure standing at the shore, facing the water, coat blowing in the wind. When she showed it to Edward, he stood in silence for a long time. "It's you," he finally said. "But it's me, too." She smiled. "It's us, between rain and sunlight." He touched the frame gently, tracing the brushstrokes. "Would you let me keep it?" She hesitated. "It's not finished yet." "Neither are we," he said softly. Later that evening, when she returned home, she found the painting propped against her door, with a note tucked behind it. Some beauty only belongs where it was born. Summer turned to autumn quietly, like a page turning itself. Clara was in her garden when she noticed the silence. No footsteps on the path, no kettle whistle from next door, no Edward sitting by the window with his book. Worried, she walked to his house. The curtains were half drawn, the air smelled of paper and rain. On the table was an envelope with her name, written in his careful handwriting. She opened it with trembling fingers. "Clara, I've gone to London for treatment. Nothing dramatic, just a matter of time catching up with me. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to make you wait for news that might never come. You brought me back to the world. The color, the laughter, the reason to get up and make tea I can't brew properly. If I don't return, know this, you didn't find me broken. You found me asleep, and you woke me with light. Yours, E. Asterisk." Her breath caught. The world blurred through tears. She held the letter to her chest, whispering, "You can't just disappear. Not now." That night, the sea outside her window was wild again, furious, endless. But she didn't hide from it this time. She sat with the letter on her lap and said softly, "I'll wait, no matter the rain." 2 months passed. The letters she sent to London went unanswered. Then one morning, A postcard arrived, a photograph of the Thames under grey skies. It said only, "Still here. The tea's terrible. E." It was enough. She packed her bag, booked a train to London, and left before she could talk herself out of it. The station smelled of rain and metal. She almost missed the train, the doors closing as she ran, laughing breathlessly, heart pounding. When she reached London, she found herself outside St. George's Hospital, clutching the address he'd once written in a margin. Inside, the corridors were too white, too quiet. A nurse led her to a small courtyard where patients sat under umbrellas. He was there, thinner, paler, but unmistakably him. "Clara," he said, voice rough but warm. "You didn't think you'd escape me that easily, did you?" He smiled, weak but real. "You always did chase storms." She sat beside him, taking his hand. "I came to bring sunlight." He closed his eyes. "Then stay until it rains again." And she did. Days became weeks. She rented a small room near the hospital, painted in the mornings and read to him in the afternoons. Sometimes they spoke in whispers, sometimes not at all. He would listen to her describe Brazil, the mango trees, the music, the sky that never stayed still. One day, as she was packing her brushes, he said quietly, "When I first saw you, I thought you were too bright for this place. And now I think maybe you were sent to remind me that light doesn't belong to any country." She smiled through tears, then promised me something. "What?" "If I stay, you live." He looked at her, the weight of time in his eyes. "And if I can't, then I'll live for both of us." The next day, his condition worsened. The doctors spoke in cautious tones, the way English people do when words are too heavy to carry. That evening, as the first rain in weeks began to fall, Edward whispered one word before sleep took him. "Stay." And she did. Winter came, and with it, endings and beginnings. Edward passed quietly one morning, sunlight breaking through the hospital window like a blessing. He was holding her last letter in his hand, the one she wrote the night before. "You taught me that silence is music, that grief has rhythm, and that love, true love, never needs translation." After the funeral, Clara returned to the cottage by the cliffs. The house felt empty at first, but the air still hummed with it. Books on the shelf, tea stains on the counter, the echo of laughter in the walls. She lit a small lantern by the window, the same way he once did with his wife. This time, the light was haze, orange, steady, alive. She painted again, but now her colors had changed. The sea was still gray, the cliffs still rugged, yet everything shimmered with warmth, as if touched by memory. On her last night in Cornwall, she took his book and placed it beside the window, open to the final page. Outside, the rain had started again, soft, unhurried, and just as she turned to leave, the clouds broke for a moment, letting sunlight fall across the room. It was brief, gentle, perfect, like love itself. Love isn't about where we come from, or the words we speak, but about the quiet courage to understand one another. Between rain and sunlight, if this story touched your heart, please help Lifetone Stories grow. Like this video, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what kind of story you'd love to hear next. Thank you for watching, and until the next story, may you always find light, even on the rainiest day.